Hello, and welcome back to our Faith Fridays, where we talk about faith issues in practical everyday life. We hope that this week has been kind to you and fruitful to some sense as we enter our 7th week of MCO. And understandably, it has been a really long stretch for all of us, probably some more than others. And it's no point denying that this MCO has troubled many of us regarding the economy of our country, the survivability of our businesses, our income, our job security, and some of you probably face the very real threat of unemployment, and quite immediately as well. I'm sure that many of us face that tug of war at this point in our spirit between wanting to trust God to provide and yet worrying how He will provide in light of the expenses that has been coming in or building up. Don't feel bad or guilty for feeling this way. It is difficult times, and these feelings are natural. I always believe that such tug of war in our spirit will end up building deeper faith within us. So, we've taken the liberty to interview Brother Rajan Devadasan, who's on our church committee, as well as is a senior licensed financial planner, who many of you already know, to dig his brains a little, to understand and prepare for the months ahead. How will we survive? More importantly, how will we thrive? Hi, Uncle Rajan. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for Faith Friday.
Thank you for having me.
Today we're discussing a little about the very real situation where, many people have started to feel the pinch or even a huge bite chunk of our dipping bank account and also our economy in the country. Brother Rajan is here to help us understand a little bit of what's going on and help us to figure out how wisely we might respond. So we just have a couple of questions for you. The first question is a pretty simple one. There's a lot of talk right now globally and even locally, of course, that this pandemic is not the only thing that's affecting our world. There's so many other things that's going to affect our world through this series of things that happen. And taking it all together, it seems that our world economy is now crashing very clearly. I've never studied economics before, so I'm not really clear about it. And for people like me and others watching right now, what might an economic crash mean, and what factors actually contribute to it in the world and as well as in Malaysia locally?
Got it. I understand. When you talk about economic pain and economic crisis, they're basically at two levels. Number one, you've got the personal economic crisis, which is what those of us who have suffered a drop in income, myself included, are facing right now. And then, of course, you've got the global issue. Just looking at the global issue first, because we will drill down into the personal side in a little while. What you must understand is that the way the global economy works, the way that any kind of national economy works, is that the faster the velocity of money through an entire system, in terms of the purchases of goods and services, the quicker your velocity of money, the healthier the economy is. The best analogy I can think of is if you're strong and healthy, if your heart is pumping well, then your blood circulates very well. Whereas if your heart is faulty and your blood flow slows down, you end up with, the medics will have to check me on coagulation. So what you want to do is to be able to get back as quickly as possible to a good, strong flow. And you're right, it isn't just the pandemic that's causing us problems. When you look at what's happening in Malaysia, in Singapore, in the US, in the UK, in Australia, in New Zealand, across the entire world, the lockdowns, which is the most common term, the CBs or circuit breakers, which is what Singapore is using, MCO in our case, movement control order, all of these initiatives by the governments to save lives have done a really good job in terms of saving lives. Let me just throw a particular statistic out at you. America has maybe about 320, 330 million people. Malaysia has about 32 million people. So we are 1/10 the size of the US. Right now, the number of Malaysian deaths is about 100. The number of US deaths, when I checked 1 or 2 days ago, was beyond 54,000. So if you scale down from 54,000 to 110, one would expect, everything else being equal, for us to basically face 5,400 deaths. But we've had about 100. Now, it's not quite fair to compare that, because it's not apples and apples, it's apples and oranges, because Malaysia in general has a very young population. And the young among us have a natural predisposition to be able to stand up and to survive any kind of COVID-19 outbreak, which is very, very good. Um, so a friend of mine who's actually also a very good client, and he's very numerically inclined. He's been running some fairly high level analysis. And he said that if you compensate for Malaysia's younger population, maybe we would have had perhaps 2,000 deaths. So the MCO up to this point has saved 1,900 lives, which is amazing. But when you listen to what's been going on around the world, it seems to be that with regard to the number of families that are affected by the MCO, the circuit breaker, the lockdown, as compared to the number of families actually affected by people dying, it's 100 to 1. In other words, 100 families that are not touched, or 99 families that are not touched by a direct COVID-19 infection, are actually suffering because of the economic slowdown. So what's happened is, I mean, you've heard the expression, right? The cure is worse than the disease. And to some extent, this might be the case. So for Malaysia, one of the most important things is to get as many of us back to work as fast as possible. Admittedly, if we need to take care of social distancing for at least a while, I understand. But we have to get back to work. We have to get the economy back up and ramping. There is another issue that is true globally, but it will really affect Malaysia. So yes, the pandemic is hurting us, but the lockdowns and the MCOs are hurting us even more. On top of all of that, from a geopolitical perspective, we actually have a massive collapse in the price of oil. Those of us who have been able to go out and fill up petrol are very, very happy. Prices have come down enormously. Unfortunately, we've got nowhere to go, nowhere to drive. I checked the other day when I filled up petrol, and it had been exactly 1 month. Normally, I'm filling up petrol every 3 or 4 days, and my tank is huge. And so it's 1 month. So I'm saving a fortune in that regard, which is something I'll come back to later. One of the reasons the main reason that the price of oil started to collapse is that just before the COVID-19 pandemic really blew up for the rest of the world, not China, but for the rest of the world last month, OPEC, led, controlled by Saudi Arabia, was trying to negotiate with Russia to bring down the level of production to try and keep the price of oil up. Russia refused to comply, and Russia started pumping. And from what I gather, then Saudi also started pumping, and then everybody started pumping. As a result of that, there's so much overpumping at a time when nobody's moving around. Most planes are grounded. No one's using jet fuel. Most of us are not driving. We're not using regular petrol. Consumption has come down, and the supply has basically flown through the roof. So when you do, when you draw what do you call it? You draw a supply and demand curve. At the point of intersection is where you've got the equilibrium price point determined. And that's why the prices keep collapsing. Now, when it comes to Asia, what you must be aware of, there are a few bright spots. When the recovery comes, and it will come, things will get better again. Asia will continue to be the growth engine of the world. Every country in Asia, with only one exception, is a net importer of oil, which means structurally, because I believe the oil price is going to stay low for a very, very long time, it's going to benefit all those countries in Asia. Most notably, of course, countries like India and China that are huge and also use a lot of oil. So prices are going to be low. It'll be easy for these countries to eventually ramp up their economies because fuel, energy will be cheap. On top of that, I have quite a few financial planning clients who are pilots. And I certainly hope that all of my clients are okay. But my general feeling is that 75% of the airlines of the world will go bankrupt during this very difficult period. And the 25%, this is my guesstimate only, the 25% of airlines that actually survive are going to be those that are either already owned by their governments or their respective governments will nationalize or semi-nationalize the airlines, take ownership of the airlines, and then give them effectively blank checks to be able to survive. From a business perspective, the rationale will be when the skyways finally reopen and we're left with only 1/4 of the world's airlines flying, there's a tremendous opportunity for consolidation and for gaining market share. So it's not all bad news, but hopefully those three things kind of make sense. The world economy is slowing down primarily because of the pandemic, and then also because of the lockdown, and then also because we have a drop in economic activity, and that's tied very closely to the price of oil. Now, I mentioned to you there's one exception, one country in Asia that is not a net importer of oil. Unfortunately, it's us. When it comes to fossil fuel energy, fossil fuel comes in three forms. Coal, which we don't have very much of. Gas, we have plenty. We export plenty of gas. And then oil, petrol as well. And so Malaysia, as far as Asia is concerned, is the only net exporter of fossil fuel energy. We are going to really hurt. And so all of our people basically need to take extra steps to deal with the difficulty ahead of us. Does that help?
Yeah, so in that sense, for us economically, is the world will, or Asia will recover quite quickly after that. But for us personally, Malaysia, it's going to be different. Is that right?
It's going to be a tough slog, I believe, yeah.
I see. Okay, we also heard a lot of news, hotels like in Ipoh and Penang who are already announced shutting down, and a lot of big companies have started giving their employees pay cut or even unpaid leave, and I'm sure a lot more are going to announce very soon as well. And in this season, I understand why this has to be done, and I understand these are all very difficult decisions for all the top managements to make. It's not something they do lightly, and it has affected all businesses. But unfortunately, regular employees and their families at the ground level will continue to need money. And these are going to affect everyone. People still need to buy food, pay bills, mortgage, rents, cars still need to be serviced. There's so many things, credit card, and all these things are very real. And even if we don't go out, we still have them coming in. So with this very real sense of real people facing the real prospect of unemployment even, what practical steps can we people take to reduce our expenses and or create alternative source of income, and how can we use budget in that as well?
Okay, there is no simple answer that's going to help everyone. I remember I visited the US for the very first time when I was 23 years old, a really long time ago. It was 1987, the summer of 1987. And the church that I was attending in California was called the Home Church. And so back then, when I actually qualified for the youth group, I joined the youth group. And I made lots of friends. And I was astounded at the number of Americans I met who actually had 2 jobs, 3 jobs. And it always stayed at the back of my mind. And over the years, back here in Malaysia, when I have written about the need for people to focus and to actually increase their active income, not in a crisis, but just in general, because even when things are okay, because of what's been going on in Malaysia, because of government policies, because of the tremendous fall in the standard of English in Malaysia over the decades, many Malaysians, not all, but many Malaysians actually find it very, very difficult to compete in the global marketplace. Having said that, I know that there are Malaysians who are fantastic, who actually do very, very well. They can compete with the best in the world outside. But inside, we actually have an educational crisis. And, thankfully with ARC and whatever else, there are initiatives to try and make things better. And our kids in church are very, very blessed because they are their grasp of English is so much better than the average grasp of English outside. And so I guess for those who are very young, the key thing to do is to understand that the world is going to continue to change. It's going to become more and more difficult. And you cannot continue business as usual. So for people in Malaysia who actually are not making enough money, or the income has basically come down, one of the things that they actually should do is seriously consider whether a career change, maybe a career change during the MCO is very, very difficult. But in general, a career change might actually make sense. So that's one. The other thing is, for those who don't really have the option to change their career, normally people who are in the lower income groups, one of the things that can be done is to actually work significantly harder. People already work hard, but I think it is not part of the Malaysian way of life for us to expect people to have two jobs. But I think moving forward, people are going to need to have two jobs, even if one is part-time, or three jobs, one full-time and two part-time. I remember in the early 90s, when I first visited Vietnam on work, when I was writing for Malaysian Business Magazine, I was astounded to meet so many Vietnamese who were doing three things. They basically had one full-time job. They spent a few hours sitting on the roadside selling vegetables, very sad, huh? And then they had another part-time job. So I think basically we have no choice. We're going to have to try and work significantly harder for those who can. And for those who've got younger children, it is absolutely imperative that they actually do everything they possibly can to enhance the children's understanding of English, for sure, but also the way the world is changing. Whether or not you're Chinese, if your kids are young enough, I think it's very, very important to learn Mandarin. Because when you look at how the world is going to pan out in the 2030s and in the 2040s, having Mandarin is a huge plus point. Now, the other thing that an individual can do basically right now is, as we are stuck at home, incomes come down. That's happened to me as well. And the truth is, for many of us, expenses have also come down. I was chatting with my sister-in-law, Esther, our principal for ARC. And I was telling her, people aren't going anywhere and therefore people are spending less. And she said, yes, unless they're basically spending all their money, all their time surfing online and buying stuff online. So if you're doing that, then you better really control yourself. You don't want to be spending more. You must distinguish between your wants and your needs. And your wants should always be below your needs. And so when you are structuring a budget, and now is a fantastic time for all of us, myself included, to revise our budget, to make it tighter, to see whether or not we can figure out ways to work harder. I need to do that myself. To work smarter, I definitely need to do that myself. To try, not just during the MCO, but in the aftermath, to be able to bring in more money, to be able to control expenses so that we can actually increase the surplus. Now, the best way to actually start working on a budget, for those who have never done it, is to actually think through what is required to get a better grasp of your finances. From a financial planning perspective, there are two statements that an individual needs to have a handle on. One is the net worth statement, which has got two parts: assets and liabilities, what you have and what you owe. But there is another statement that is even more important than your net worth statement, and that is your cash flow statement. And your cash flow statement has two parts also: cash in, cash out. Now, for people who have multiple jobs, or they actually have savings that will generate dividends or distributions or interest, or they actually own property where rental is coming in, all of those sources of income, whether it be active income from work or passive income from your investments, all of that flows into the top half of your cash flow statement. So that gives you a figure. It may be the same every month for some people, but probably it may vary. So you have one figure, which is cash in. And then you've got, in the bottom half of your cash flow statement, you've got all your expenses. So the budget and the cash flow statement are not the same. They're very closely linked, but they're not the same. So if you have your cash flow statement, or if you don't build it, all your cash in items, all your cash out items, then with your budget, what you do is you just take that single line item, the total for cash in, and that becomes the top line item for your budget. And then what you want to do is to work out your budget expenses based on your values in life. And, most of us have to spend most of the money that comes in basically just to survive. But as I have said many times, both in writing for Agape Line and also when I've spoken in church and out, within a Christian setting, I believe that there's a four-tiered structure that people should actually adhere to when it comes to the allocation of the cash that comes in. So remember, now we're talking about a budget. You got your single line item for cash in. How do you spend your money? If we have ever needed God, it is now. And so when we look at Malachi chapter 3, particularly Malachi 3 verses 8 to 12, so if you can later, everyone just have a look at that. Those 5 verses are the most compelling admonition we have in the Bible for us to pay our tithe. And that portion actually, to the best of my knowledge, is the only portion where God actually says, test me in this and see if I will not open up my storehouse in heaven and pour down so much blessing that there is no space for it. Now remember, from an Agapean DNA perspective, we are blessed to be a blessing. It is one of our DNA strands. We are blessed to be a blessing. And I don't know about you, but I certainly need God right now to open his floodgates and to cause blessing to come in. And as he does so, I personally need to act as a conduit of blessing. And I think that's true for everyone. So whether you consider yourself rich or middle class or poor, we all have an opportunity to bless people who are less well off than we are. There are always going to be people who are less well off than we are. So the four-tiered structure, which is how I think you should structure your budget as well, the expenditure side. Number 1, pay your tithe. Whether it be gross or net, I don't really care. I don't think anyone really cares between you and God. Personally, I decided a long time ago I want gross blessing. So it keeps the numbers simple. Once you've allocated your tithe, 10%, you've got 90% left over. The 3 remaining tiers for allocation of cash would be, number 2, save and invest for yourself. In other words, you've got to have a savings program and investment program. The reason is Jesus said it is more blessed to give than to receive, which is true. Jesus said it is true. But you cannot give what you do not have, and you cannot have unless you underspend. And so therefore, saving and investing, I think, is the second thing that you need to do. The third thing, I think, is we need to look out for the needs of others. So we need to exercise generosity. And so I think giving to charity, giving to others, it can also include your offering in church, your missions pledges, your building pledges, things like that. And then the last thing is live on what is left. So if you got 100% coming in, and whether your 100% is 1,000 ringgit or 10,000 ringgit or 100,000 ringgit a month, and the average Malaysian, I think, probably has money coming in, perhaps 4,000 ringgit per month, 5,000 ringgit per month. Because the tiering of the Malaysian society is B40, M40 and T20. The average income for a B40 household is 3,500 ringgit per month for the entire household. Oh, by the way, the average size of a household in Malaysia is 4 people. So for B40 at 3,500, each person survives on slightly less than 900 a month. At M40, the average household brings in about 7,000 ringgit per month, so twice as well off. And then at the T40, the average income is about 14,000. So it's quite interesting, actually. It keeps doubling up. So regardless of where you are, you want to basically cut your suit or make your suit based on the cloth that you have. And you want to basically have a budget. So I hope that helps. But most important, you're going to have to look and decide what are your wants, what are your needs. Make sure that your needs are taken care of first. Hopefully that helps.
We also recognize that the budget breakdown that you have just given has been something you've always been promoting, the same tiers. I recognize it as the same tiers. It's workable whether in good times or in bad times. So in these times, it seems that there's a lot of actual budgeting. Before this, we may be able to, it's okay, we'll just work with it. But now we actually have to look into it and really have to think very carefully, save a lot. We have to tighten our belts, like you said, make certain sacrifices. Same like when we had economic crisis during the 90s, right? A lot of people were actually tightening their belts as well. And as you said, yes. Yep. And as you said, probably look at an alternative source of income as in doubling job. So I may need to look for a part-time job too soon.
Yeah, then first. I'm pretty sure there's extra work in church. Very much.
Okay. Well, that's for the individual employees, but we do have members of our community and even church who own businesses. And I guess that's slightly different. And in businesses, we've also seen, because they are the employers themselves, quite a large hit right now in many business owners. What can business owners do now in order to reduce that damage? And even though, as you said earlier, that this is not going to last forever, we know we will come back to a time of economic stability and people will find times coming back. And how are they prepared? Because a crisis happens like every 10 years or so, or 5 or 10 years, there will usually be a crisis that will land us. So we need to learn, business owners also need to learn to be prepared for the next big crisis.
So what's the question?
What can we do now to reduce damage for businesses? And also, what can business owners do to prepare for the next big crisis?
Got it. Okay. Whether it's a Christian-run business or any kind of business, there are two things that are exactly the same. You want to preserve cash as much as you possibly can because cash is your lifeblood. Cash flow is like the blood flow. You require that. The moment the cash flow stops, your entire thing is going to stop. And your entire ability is going to stop. The other thing that is true, whether it's a Christian business or it's a secular business, is that you want to be able to pivot, you want to be nimble. If you find that whatever business you've been in, as you chug along this particular path, if you find that going forward, it's not going to be the most viable thing, don't stubbornly hang on to that. You can stay in business, you can retain your business entity, but nobody says that you have to continue to make bullock carts in a time when everyone is driving a car. And for car manufacturers, no one is saying that you have to continue to build only petrol cars when eventually we're going to be moving to the hydrogen cell, we're going to be moving to hybrid vehicles, electric cars. So we got to be nimble and we got to be willing to pivot and we need to change. The other thing is, yes, we need to preserve cash, but I think the key distinction between a secular business and a Christian business is this. Proper capitalism, when we look at it through a Christian lens, yes, we put our own capital at risk. And we don't do it because it's a charity. We do it because we want to make more money. But having said that, we do understand, and I think Christians understand this even more, we do understand that we have an obligation to take care of our employees. And so the next bit of advice that I'm going to give is actually very, very unconventional, and it may not sit very well with many people, but I'm not sharing this to be popular. Hopefully a few people will be able to pick this up and actually make a difference. Right now, it's a case of survival. So just try and preserve as much cash, try and generate as much cash flow as you possibly can. But this crisis will pass. And eventually we will get back to more normal times and the economy will pick up. And hopefully our business profits will continue to rise. When our business profits rise, I would recommend don't take all the money and spend it. Build up retained earnings inside your business, whether it be a sole proprietorship, whether it be your company. Build up the reserves. Now, I have spoken many times about the importance of an EBF, an emergency buffer fund. For people who are conventionally employed, they require an emergency buffer fund, which is parked in maybe a bank current account, a bank savings account, a series of bank fixed deposits, maybe in a money market fund inside their broad portfolio. For those Agapians listening now who may actually be East Malaysian Bumiputrans, they're Christians, but they also qualify for ASB, whether it be ASB or ASB1. Putting money in ASB also is a very good place for your emergency buffer fund. If you are a conventional employee, your buffer should be between 3 and 6 months, not of your income, but of your expenses. So let's say you earn 4,000 ringgit per month, but you spend 3,000 ringgit per month. So you're able to save 1,000 ringgit a month. You spend 3,000 per month and you say that I want to have a 5-month buffer. 5 times 3 is 15,000 ringgit. You want to have a buffer inside your current account, savings account, fixed deposits, money market account, maybe ASP for those who qualify, but for most of us, we don't qualify, of 15,000 ringgit. That's if you're a conventional employee and you believe you're going to stay that way. If you are in business, for yourself, for your family, you should have an emergency buffer of 6 and 12 months expenses. And for those who are employees but plan to start their own business down the road, increase your buffer. Remember, for the example, just now I said 5-month buffer. But if you believe 1, 2, 3, 4 years from now, you want to go start your own business, increase your personal buffering till you get to 12 months. Only then step up. That'll reduce the stress for your family, for yourself. But for businesses, one of the things that you may actually want to try and do is build up a business-specific emergency buffer between 12 and 24 months business expenses. Let's say your business brings in 50,000 ringgit per month and you have a burn rate of 40,000 ringgit per month. Not a huge business, but a modest-sized business with some employees. If you build an emergency buffer of 12 months, you need 480,000 ringgit. If you build an emergency buffer of 24 months, you need 960,000 ringgit. You can keep that in the bank, you can keep it in a money market fund linked to your company or whatever else. But this is the bit that is unconventional. Most people would say, why would I leave dead money like that? This is the reason. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, if we hit another crisis, if you have that buffer in place so that if your income again goes to zero, you can still pay everything. You can pay your rent, you can pay your utilities. Most importantly, you can pay your people. You can sustain 3 months, no problem, 6 months, no more problem, 9 months, no problem. And you won't need to fire anyone. At the same time, your competitors around you, because they probably only have 1 or 2 months buffer and they can't survive, they will be closing like that. And that will give you an opportunity to hire their very best staff. And in bad times, you will be able to expand. So hopefully that's enough in terms of guidelines.
Yes. So building a budget, building a buffer is really important, especially for businesses. But sorry, just want to recap on what can they do now in order to reduce damage. However, because we know it will come back, but how about now that we are already?
Now, basically, do everything you need to do to try and preserve the cash that you have available, make it stretch out as long as possible, and also to stay nimble and to consider whether there are other areas of business that can go into. I mean, the news is awash with businesses that very, very quickly pivoted and started making face shields and masks.
Right.
That demanded.
So a lot of reinventing of ourselves and finding ways to make money that may be unconventional for businesses at the time, but it doesn't matter. There's always opportunities everywhere, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. Last question, just of personal interest moving forward. Imagine that we will naturally start to refrain from spending. As we mentioned, we should start saving and not spend too much. But if people are not spending, wouldn't that affect economy as a whole? Economy will take longer to inflate, right? So what will it take for our country and world at large to get back to a comfortable place of economically?
Okay, good question. So you're saying that even after things get better, you're expecting people to spend less money. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, got it. So therefore, do you remember right at the beginning, I said that the health of an economy, like the health of a body, is tied to the velocity of money, just as the blood circulation needs to be strong and healthy. So you're absolutely right. It is conceivable that this COVID-19 recession could turn into a COVID-19 depression, and there hasn't been a depression since 1929 to 1939. The people who went through that Great Depression were scarred permanently, and they came out being super, super, super careful with money. And the same thing should happen to us, and there's nothing wrong with being careful with money. But what you must understand also is that in the last, I think 3 or 4 decades in particular, the expansion of the global economy has been on the back of increased consumer spending. When you look at GDP and the contributors toward GDP, there are 3 components: government spending, business spending, and individual household or consumer spending. And for a lot of countries, the consumer is the most important part of the entire economy. Because the consumer is the most important part of the economy, what you constantly want to do to show economic growth, you must get the consumer to spend more and more and more. Unfortunately, what governments in tandem with banks have done is to actually make it easier and easier and easier for us to borrow money. How many of us have housing loans, maybe multiple housing loans, car loans, multiple car loans, credit cards, many credit cards? The most dangerous thing about credit cards, in my opinion, is not having them. It is not paying them off in full every month. And when I say this, I am not speaking from some kind of ivory tower. I have been down in the trenches and I have messed up with credit cards twice in my life. I got into credit card problems with UK credit cards in the 1980s, and it took me years after coming back to Malaysia to slowly pay off everything. But because I'm a very slow learner, as soon as I got rid of my UK credit card debt, to celebrate, I got into credit card problems in Malaysia. And that took a few more years to get out. So now, hopefully, I've learned my lesson. I still use credit cards. I don't see a danger in that for me. But there are people who honestly, who know themselves and they believe that they cannot handle credit cards. For them, they should actually move away and move to debit cards. So you know how the Bible says that we are a peculiar people. And I'm obviously taking this out of context, but I want you to think about the term peculiar, think about the synonym eccentric. As the world recovers, I think most people, I'm pretty sure most people outside of the church are actually going to come out, and very quickly they're going to get back to the normal cycle of, I don't have enough money, I'm going to borrow some more. I can't make ends meet, I'm just going to charge it to my credit card. And I think what wise people should do, whether they are Christians or not Christians, is that we need to basically aim to be different. And the way to do that is to spend less than you earn, save and invest the difference, and do it for a long time. Spend less than you earn, save and invest the difference, and do it for a long time. So my recommendation is, I believe the economy will pick up. Unfortunately, I think the economy is going to pick up because the vast majority of people out there are going to go back into their normal habits eventually, not immediately. The pain of the COVID-19 crisis will stick with us for at least a year. But I think once we're past a year, gradually we're going to fall back into our old habits. But the wisest of us, I think, will actually take away two key lessons. We will basically work very, very hard to reduce our debt burden, hopefully get it down to zero and then stay out of debt. And the other thing is we're going to be far more focused in terms of managing the money that comes in and making sure that we pay our tithe, that we save and invest, that we give generously to people who need our help, and we manage with what we have. And I think if we do that, then as we move into the next crisis, whether it be 5 years from now or 10 years from now, Christians who heed this advice in particular, I think will actually be in much better shape.
Right. So much for answering these questions, and thank you for your time to do this interview as well. So once again, thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome, Pastor Shan.
God bless.
Bye-bye.
Agape will be organizing a workshop for those who are interested called Our Refuge, Our Fortress and Our Money by Rajan Devadasan. He has previously done this workshop with the Bible College of Malaysia, twice in fact, on a pro bono basis. And he's now running it for us for free. And because we are doing this over Zoom, participants will need to be limited to 100 packs only and on a first-come, first-served basis. Now this workshop will be held on the 9th of May, Saturday night at 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. where there will be 90 minutes of teaching followed by a 30-minute official Q&A session. If you are interested to sign up, do head over to our website. The link will be shown on the screen. And please note that once we've reached the maximum limit of 100 participants, we will be putting up a sign indicating that registration is closed. And as I know, this workshop will fill up very fast, And so we are letting you know here first for those who are faithfully joining us for Faith Friday services, and so that you have a chance to sign up first. So take this opportunity and do it as soon as possible.
Okay, right now we want to look into scriptures to see what God says about finance, about our money. Yeah, in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, it says that no one can serve two masters. You will either hate the one or love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. It's a common misunderstanding that this verse actually implies that you can only choose God over money, in the sense that you can have one and not the other. This is not true. You look at the Bible, for example, like in the Old Testament, there are many occasions where God actually blesses people in financial abundance. Just look at our patriarch, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Look at the kings, King David, King Solomon. God actually blessed. So over here, I would like to say that God bless, and God can bless us financially. But I would also like to qualify myself to state that financial wealth itself is not always a sign of blessing from God. We want to make ourselves very clear here. Just because we don't have in abundance, in this sense, money, it doesn't mean that God isn't blessing. We just want to clear that up. But the point here isn't about having one and not the other. In fact, it's about having both. It's about having both. God is not opposed to the idea of money, but God is simply opposed to the idea that anyone should love the gift more than the giver, to love money more than God, to serve money and not God. So money is a good servant. In a sense, it's a good tool. It can be a great channel of blessing, but it's a bad master. So in this sense, we must never serve money, and we must never be enslaved by money. All right? So this word simply stress that we can't serve two masters. It's not that we can't have both. It simply says we can't serve both. It's not about choosing only God and not money. All right? It's about prioritizing God as master over money itself. So you are a servant of God and master of your money, as my title teaching goes. So in this verse is teaching that one must only, in this verse it is not teaching that one must only have God and not money. No, it is only teaching that we must love God as the giver more than the give money, that we must serve God and not money. Be a servant of God, master of money. So in order to do this, we can do three things. Just remember there are three S. The first one, steward of God in things we have control. There are two things we need to remember here. First, grow what you have. Second, give to those who don't have, which I want to stress over here. Put into practice sound financial principle, which I believe Rajan has already generously given earlier. In growing, Proverbs chapter 27, verse 23 to 24, it says here, be sure you know the condition of your flocks. Give careful attention to your herds, for riches do not endure forever, and the crown is not secure for all generations. Over here it says that know the conditions and give careful attention. So we need to be wise in the things that God has already given us, to be a good steward of God in this sense. In giving, in Luke chapter 3, verse 11, in the context of producing good fruit in view of salvation, John the Baptist answered, anyone who has 2 shirts should share with the one who has none, and anyone who has food should do the same. Note, it didn't say that if you have much, okay, it didn't say that if you have much. It didn't say that if you have 10 shirts, give one. It didn't say that. The Bible says that if you only have 2 shirts, if you only have a little bit extra, a spare nonetheless, give to another who doesn't even have one. Okay, so the Bible is saying that we need to give from what little we have to those who don't even have little. Give not only when times are good, give also when times are bad, especially to those who are doing worse than us. We need to remember them. So to lift up your spirit, I'll read to you a few scripture. In Proverbs chapter 11, verse 25, a generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. Proverbs 14:21, it is a sin to despise one's neighbor, but blessed is the one who is kind to the needy. Proverbs 22, verse 9, the generous will themselves be blessed, for they share their food with the poor. So church, in much or little, we are still blessed to be a blessing. So we have the first S, steward of God in things we have control. The second S, surrender to God in things we have no control. Trust God to provide, especially in hard times, after we have done all that we could. We put into practice sound financial advice, sound financial practices, but we also need to put into practice our faith in God. Trust God to take care of us. Trust in His love for us. Trust that He is the good Father to us, His children. Trust that He is the good shepherd to us, His sheep. Trusting God doesn't guarantee there's no hardship at all, but it does give us peace. Peace that comes from trusting who God is and who we are to Him. In knowing that the God who never sleeps nor slumber will continue to watch over us regardless. And that should give us peace and calm our worries so that we don't lose sleep. All right? And the third S will be satisfying in God in all things, for God is always in control. Finally, when we choose to be good steward of God in growing what we have and giving to those who don't have, while also surrendering to God, trusting Him, finally we can be content, we can be safe, and we can be satisfying in God through good times and bad times. All is well with our soul. For God is still good and God is still in control. In bad times, we need to learn to count our blessing, magnify His blessing, magnify good, magnify God. We are still blessed to be a blessing and we are still loved by God.
So, we hope that you've been blessed by this session and have managed to receive something into your spirit. Once again, as you gather with your family or your Connect group, these are some questions that you can use to kick off your conversations. You can press pause or screenshot at this time. Just a quick reminder before we end, this Sunday is our Communion Sunday. So we are going to have communion together during our online service. Remember to prepare your emblems, a kind of grape juice for the cup, as well as bread or biscuit for the bread element. Thank you for tuning in. Take care and God bless.